Welcome to the European Dialogue, where we dive into the greatest issues shaping our world today. I'm Emily Jones, and in this episode, we will explore the geopolitics of EU enlargement, what it is, why it matters, and why it matters now. To help us navigate this topic, I was delighted to speak with Professor Veronica Anghel, an expert at the intersection of comparative politics and international relations. Veronica is an assistant professor at the Robert Schuman Centre, where she co-leads the EU Enlargement Hub, a research initiative focusing on lessons from past EU enlargement phases and their relevance for current policy challenges, including Ukraine's path to integration. Her research on democracy, European integration, and transatlantic relations has been widely published in leading journals and edited volumes, and we will be touching on a couple of those in this conversation. She's also an award-winning scholar, recognised as a rising star by the European Consortium for Political Research in 2021. In this episode, we will hear about the geopolitics of enlargement. For full transparency, we actually recorded this conversation a few weeks prior to the US administration changeover in January 2025, although much of what you will hear Veronica talk about regarding Russia's influence and the role of the US is, very much still live and if not even more relevant. We will hear about how the EU balances security building and democracy, what this means for European integration, and why this conversation is especially urgent in today's global landscape. So, first of all, a very warm welcome to the podcast, Veronica.
It's great to be here, Emily. Thank you for the invitation.
Perhaps a really basic warm-up question for you, and to make sure our audience are also all on the same page. What is enlargement?
Well, absolutely. What a question. I think that it's important to notice that the enlargement of the European Union is not just a policy of expansion, as the word suggests. It's a strategic tool to promote peace and stability across Europe. And this was one of the most successful tools that the European Union has had in creating that peace and stability. And it continues to be a fundamental way in which the European Union establishes itself, stays relevant, and also creates a role for itself in the world under conditions of great uncertainty and disorder.
Absolutely. So a key approach or tool that the EU have used to create stability in the region. And now in your own research on this tool of enlargement, for example, in your article titled 3 Lessons from the 2004 Big Bang Enlargement, which is co-authored with Eric Jones, and in the podcast description, you emphasize the EU's enlargement as a strategic move for peace and stability. Could you explain the most relevant findings of your article?
The article references the 2004 Big Bang enlargement when 10 countries joined the European Union. And we look at this as a key study that offers 3 vital lessons. First, the enlargement is a security imperative. So one important observation is that the pace and scope of enlargement often respond to broader security concerns rather than just whether a candidate is ready to join the European Union. So the 2004 enlargement occurred in the shadow of the Kosovo War, emphasizing the need for stability in Europe, but also in situations where the countries were not particularly ready to join, and that who joined, like Romania or Bulgaria, who joined the European Union under special provisions, post-accession conditionality, if we are to use some jargon. So the security-driven approach underscores that the EU's mission extends beyond economic prosperity to include its foundational goal, which is maintaining peace. And it also teaches us that enlargement can act as a stabilizing force in regions where the risk of instability could spill over into the broader continent. And you can see I'm already hinting at what is happening today in the process of enlargement. But to go back to the 3 vital lessons, the second one would be that there are limits to the EU's transformative power. The European Union is not a kind of a magic wand that you can just use to create lasting change. The EU is often celebrated for its ability to transform candidate countries by requiring them to meet political, economic, and institutional benchmark for membership. And we could see this across Central and Eastern Europe's transformations from authoritarianism to liberal democracies and market economies. However, we also highlight that there's a critical limitation. Once countries gain membership, the EU's leverage diminishes. Many other authors have written about this. For instance, the backsliding, democratic backsliding of Hungary or Poland into liberal governance after joining shows that transformation during accession is not always permanent. So this is a reminder of the importance of having robust monitoring and scenario planning even after accession. And third, we have to keep track of the impacts on the European Union itself, because enlargement changes the EU just as much as it changes the candidate country. So this Big Bang enlargement introduced greater diversity and complexity into the EU's decision-making processes, and this can lead to challenges like congestion in governance, free riding by some members, and the alternative, though, a Europe without enlargement would be far worse. And this is how we could bring it back into the current situation. The article argues that by integrating these countries, Central and Eastern Europe, in the past, you mitigated the risk of economic disruption, political instability that might have arisen from their exclusion, and it can do so again as the EU prepares for a new round of enlargement, potentially adding Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and others. So these lessons learned are incredibly relevant. This next phase, however, will be even more complex given these geopolitical stakes with Russia and the even greater diversity among candidate countries.
Indeed, there is a growing sense of urgency in Europe right now regarding the need for greater peace and stability, with also a renewed focus on boosting defense budgets and improving European solidarity in response to, let's say, the influence of other global powers. Of course, we find ourselves in quite a considerably different geopolitical moment than where we were in 2004, before the 2004 Eastern enlargement. But with our current situation in mind, how do non-democracy promoters such as Russia influence the accession process of current EU candidates, such as Ukraine, Moldova, or even the prospects of Georgia?
Well, this is a crucial question because non-democratic actors right now, particularly Russia, exert a significant influence over the accession processes of current EU candidates, which was not the case for the countries that joined in 2004 and after. And they shape both internal dynamics in these countries and the EU's own approach to enlargement. So first of all, they shape what's happening in the candidate countries through direct influence, traceable influence. Russia's strategy centers on destabilization to undermine the European aspiration of its neighbors. And this happens through territorial aggression. We saw Russia's military intervention starting from the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its ongoing war in Ukraine. This creates obstacles to accession. The EU has traditionally required territorial disputes to be resolved as part of the accession process, or usually countries become NATO members before they join the EU, and it doesn't seem to be an offer that Ukraine can benefit from, exactly because there is, in my opinion, an unjustified strategy of not escalating with the conflict with Russia, but that's a separate conversation. But Russia leverages these conflicts to complicate or to delay candidates' progress. And then another favorite strategy is political destabilization. We could see this in Moldova and Georgia. Russia supports separatist regions like Transnistria, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. This further fragments these states, challenges their sovereignty, their ability to control all their territory, to create the reforms that the European Union needs. And this destabilization makes it harder for these countries to implement really reforms that are difficult to implement in times of peace. The EU asks really a lot of the countries that join. So you are thinking of Ukraine. what they do is really remarkable. They are both defender and reformer at the same time. And finally, there's this disinformation campaign. So Russia uses information warfare to sow skepticism about the EU within candidate countries. And so these campaigns often aim to amplify already existing internal divisions, to delegitimize democratic institutions, to erode public support for European integration. And so this just happens in the countries, but also there's indirect influence throughout the European Union that Russia can exercise as well. And candidate countries like Ukraine and Moldova are not just seeking membership; they're doing so under the explicit threat of Russian aggression, and this urgency challenges the EU to act quickly. But it also raises difficult questions about how to reconcile strategic imperatives with rigorous reform, and this creates problems of decision making in the EU, and coherence, and also Russia directly supports anti-European language and candidates. The latest example that we see from Romania is very telling about the breadth of influence that Russia can have in supporting their own candidates in the European Union. So there's a lot that these actors do. We speak of Russia, but there are also all sorts of hybrid warfare coming from state-like actors that resemble more Chinese activity. So there's really a lot that these candidates can do to impede enlargement, which was not the case in a bit more stable environment at the end of the Cold War.
Well, I hadn't quite realized how extensive the influence is from Russia on candidate countries, and really, really how destabilizing that is for European power. So in your piece titled "The Geopolitics of EU Enlargement from Club to Commons," which is also co-authored with Eric Jones, you discuss the risks of admitting countries with unstable democracies. So how do you think the EU can balance then this urgency of enlargement due to security concerns mentioned with the necessity of democratic reforms in candidate countries?
That is a major question. There's definitely not necessarily a choice to be made, but we like to call this the process of enlarging fast and slow. So on the one hand, there are certain moves that need to happen on a quick timeline because there's important, like the generation of more security, which requires enlargement. On the other hand, you want to make sure that you're bringing in stable partners. So the EU must weigh its desire to stabilize its eastern neighborhood against the risk of admitting countries that may not fully meet democratic, economic, and institutional criteria. And it's not just because this can create divisions among EU member states so that it can weaken the European Union, but it's because also the candidates themselves would benefit from the type of reforms that make them democratic and economically stable, and with strong institutions. And if you have a process of accession that is too fast, that doesn't look at the process itself, the transformation process itself, but only at the outcome, a country in the European Union as a full member, then you risk creating long-term problems in these countries, right? So, for example, being a member of the single market creates can create a lot of economic inequalities in the society of a new member state. And this can lead down the line to a disenchanted population. We've seen this as being a major problem with the rise of nationalism, anti-EU politics in the EU itself. So you don't want to create the conditions for more candidates, for future members to amplify these sort of problems that European Union already has. So the weighing the security versus standards is very important. And I think that the answer right now is that security is an immediate need. So this be the enlarging fast to generate more security for the European Union, particularly a country like Ukraine that is the shield of Europe right now, and needs the kind of support and the entanglement with the European Union that a policy of enlargement can bring. But on the other hand, attention to standards is very important to be upheld. So it's a daunting task, particularly for candidate states, but also for the EU. What I do want to mention is that in support for enlargement in the European Union is still very high throughout the EU. We've conducted polls at the European University Institute, Robert Schuman Centre, since the full-scale invasion, and we can see that support for the EU, for the EU to enlarge among the population is still pretty high in the European Union. And what we see that drives less support for aiding Ukraine is the existence of narratives that would rather prefer to have a neutral stance towards Russia. So it is the people who think that and it's NATO's fault or the United States' fault that we have this problem in Eastern Europe, who are also less likely to support more aid for Ukraine, including enlargement. So what the EU can do here, and unfortunately hasn't done very coherently, is to have a strategy of communication that centers on its own narratives and it counteracts Russia's spread of disinformation about its own role in the region. I think this is very important to stress, that the EU needs to invest in its own narratives for success and to promote the truth about what's happening in Ukraine, particularly right now.
So, moving away from the EU for a moment, what are your thoughts on the US? Do you think the transition to the Trump administration again will affect the EU's enlargement policies?
I like the way you framed that, moving away from the EU for a minute, because I'm afraid that's exactly what the new US Trump administration is seeking to do. I think that I'll answer this question based on a recent trip that I took, a research trip that I took to Kyiv a couple of weeks ago. And in in the conversations that I've had there with contacts, there was definitely a feeling of resilience that permeated people in the security environment, in economic. Those who are involved in economic reforms, in EU negotiations, to the extent that they say, well, we can't change the situation on the ground in Washington. Okay, we have to work with what we have, and we have to work with the Trump administration. It's not entirely clear for them, as we're all waiting to see a more practical plan about how the United States incoming Trump administration wants to stop the war. They're supposed to stop it in 24 hours, but we all know that this war cannot be stopped in 24 hours because Russia doesn't want to stop the war, right? So they can stop the war and they can stop attacking Ukraine. They're not doing it. So this idea that the Trump administration can deliver a ceasefire that is also stable is really unlikely. So, however, the Ukrainians are definitely doing their best in trying to understand what kind of a deal, because that's what Trump uses as an example, what kind of a deal would satisfy Trump and his administration to support Ukraine's interests and not Russia's interests, to make sure that a ceasefire arrangement is not favorable to Russia. and to what Putin wants to do. This is very difficult right now, but that's how the Ukrainians are looking at it. And I think that the strategy for the European Union in terms of enlargement becomes even more urgent with a Trump administration, because Trump is challenging even more the strength of the transatlantic partnership, and the European Union has no choice but to make itself more appealing as a partner in this relationship. And as we've seen from also the famous Draghi report that we've read recently, but also it's easy to notice in multiple dimensions, particularly in defense, the European Union is not really a very strong partner and is definitely in an asymmetric position towards the United States. So by investing in enlargement, by creating that kind of a geopolitical role for itself, they are more likely to increase their relevance, and the EU is more likely to increase its relevance in a partnership with the United States.
Yes, indeed. And well, for those who haven't heard about it yet or had the chance to read it, the Draghi report mentioned, it refers to Mario Draghi. This is the former European Central Bank president. He and his team, the European Commission, were tasked with and have recently published a report that outlines a sort of roadmap for Europe's economic policy if our region is to stay relevant and regain its power and influence in the world. So now, Veronica, on the topic of influence, as you know, our EU Values Network focuses on promoting research and dialogue around democracy, values, and EU integration. And so in your view, how can collaborating with academics like yourself, policymakers, and other parts of civil society help us to reform the EU's institutions and decision-making processes, ensuring then the Union is prepared to integrate a larger, hopefully more diverse membership, whilst strengthening and retaining its strength of democratic resilience?
Emily, I think that the work that the network does is crucial to delivering these results. You are creating space for researchers to present their work to a larger audience, and that is not something that we are naturally inclined to do in our small bubbles. So that's definitely an important aspect of our work. We can only be grateful that you are taking the lead in creating that kind of space for us. Bridging the gap between academics and policymakers is something that we strive to do at the Robert Schuman Centre as well, and it's not always easy. We speak with different vocabulary, we have different jargon, we have different kind of incentives when it comes to publications. So bringing knowledge, translating knowledge to policymakers is a crucial part of our work. I think that the EU Values Network is doing that very, very well, and I really appreciate you inviting me to be a part of your mission.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time and expertise, Veronica. We've really enjoyed learning from you today, and we will wait with anticipation for the start of the Trump administration and to see what happens next regarding EU enlargement.
It was great to be here. Thank you for the questions, Emily.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for tuning in today to this lovely podcast. If you liked what you heard, please leave us a comment somewhere. We're on YouTube, Spotify, SoundCloud, and you can listen to this through our website as well. So until next time, take care, stay informed, and tune in soon.